It's a beautiful spring morning, about 2,000 years ago in the southwest of China. Mother Nature put on a beautiful display of colors: pink peach blossom, white pear blossom, and green grasses. Riding on horses, three brothers were rushing through the road and did not stop to enjoy the scenery. The oldest one, named Liu, was a tall guy with long ears like a Buddha. The second brother has red face, was very masculine, and has beautiful long beards. The youngest one, named Zhang, had a dark face with bickering whiskers, looked tough. They were on their way to visit a gentleman they'd never seen before. His name was Zhuge Liang. And this was their third visit to this gentleman they never met, Zhuge Liang. At that time, China has been in war for a few years. Different generals and governments constantly fighting with each other, trying to compete for lands and population. Those three brothers has their ambition too. They want to form a big kingdom so that they can bring peace and happiness to their people. However, so far, they weren't very successful. They have very small army and was constantly driven by other forces from city to city. They are in a desperate need for some great advisor who could help them define the strategy and who could help them to define approach to turn their ambition into reality. And this young man they never met before, named Zhuge Liang, have been advised by many wise people. They suggested this was the man you want to get to help you to realize your dream, your ambition, your entire kingdom plan relied on him. That's why this is their third attempt to try to meet this young man they never met before. The first visit happened previous year in the winter. They arrived in the door of this young man and they knocked on the door. A young child opened the door. The oldest brother Liu stepped up and said, "Would you please let your master know that the General Zhuge, mayor of Guangzhou and owner of Shishui, and also royal uncle Liu Bei would like to meet him." The young child said, "Such a long title, I couldn't catch them all." And then Liu said, "Okay, just tell your master Liu Bei is here." "I'm sorry, my master left this morning." "Where did he go?" He went to visit some friends. It may be a few days or maybe a few weeks. I have no idea when he will come back. Liu was very disappointed. But there's no choice, right? So he and his brothers just went home. A few days later, Liu sent a messenger to confirm that Zhuge Liang was home. So they put out their horses and set out to the trip. It was actually a very cold day. The wind chill was terrible. And shortly after they started their trip, it started to snow heavily. The youngest brother Zhang said, Why don't we just turn around? It's just an unknown young man. Why don't we just send somebody to bring him to our camp? Liu said, no, that's not the way to treat some heathen people. All our plan is relying on him. We couldn't do that. And then he said, if you feel it's too cold, just turn around and go home. Zhang said, no, I'm so brave to even fight on the field. How can I be afraid of the snow? I just think it's not worth our effort, brother. You're such an important person. You shouldn't spend all this time trying to visit this person. We don't even know who he is. And Liu said, no. For our dream, for our plan, we must do it. So they continue their trip. Then they arrive at the door, knock on the door. The same young child answered the door. Liu said, is your master at home today? Liang said, yes, he's reading in the house. They were very happy and went into the room. And then they saw there's a young man sitting right in the middle of the room and reading something. Liu took a step forward. How lucky I am finally to meet you. I have heard your name for a very long time. The young man said, are you royal uncle Liu Bei? You must mean you want to see my brother. Oh, so you're not Zhuge Liang? No, I'm his younger brother. My brother actually just left home to visit some friends, and he's not coming back today. Okay. Can I leave a letter to him? So Liu actually wrote a very long letter to explain his ambition, and give the letter to his brother. And then they left. So that's what happened in the previous 2 visits. And we come back to the day. As they get close to the house, they become more concerned. Were we able to finally meet the person today? Was he as good as everyone else described it? Will he agree to join us to be our advisor? With all those questions, they knocked the door for the 3rd time. The same young child answered the door. And yes, Zhuge Liang is home, finally! But the young child said, my master is napping now. And then Liu said, okay, let's not to disturb him. Let's just go in. So all 3 brothers and the young child walked into the room. And there, they saw a young man lying there, facing away from them. So they standing quietly, patiently waiting, and waiting, and waiting. Suddenly, Zhang lost his patience. He said, how will I set a fire in his yard? Then he will wake up. Liu said, no, don't do that, don't do that. You guys go away, go away, go away. I'll be waiting here. So finally, the 2 brothers left the house. They're waiting outside. And then Liu standing there for a very, very long time. Finally, that young man Zhuge Liang woke up with the song. It's so pleasant to sleep in my simple house. And he turned around, asked the young child, are there any visitors today? The young child said, yes. Royal Uncle Liu Bei has been waiting for me. Why don't you wake me up? Let me change my clothes. finally emerged. He was a very handsome young man, full of confidence. And he introduced himself to Liu, and finally they sat down together, have an in-depth discussion about the politics situation. And Liu, of course, expressed his eager and his ambition. And Zhuge Liang analyzed the situation in depth and concluded that Liu should become the king of the west of China. Liu was completely persuaded. The rest was history. It took less than 15 years for Liu to conquer the west of China and become the king of there. And Zhuge Liang served as their chief advisor for both Liu and his son until he died in the battlefield serving his son. From this story we can see the greatest success is to choose the right people.
Well, Christina, I really like your presence up there. I was caught up into it. I was starting to follow it and get engaged with the characters. And you've got a very good storytelling method or voice so that we can just feel, and I felt very calm just listening to it and getting intent about what's going on. And the thing that I would like to just maybe have you pay attention to is something that artists or actors do. They really step into their characters' roles. Here's how they do it. You imagine before that how to do that by physically taking your hands and stepping into that character in your imaginary world. You do that before, and then when you're actually doing the presentation, it becomes automatic. So you can switch multiple roles that you're talking. And when that happens, the demeanor, the voice, the tonality, all that happens automatically. You know, it's effortless, and that's how actors do that. So consider doing that as you're telling stories, because the part of the story, as opposed to just reading a story, is really making him come alive.
The dialogue in the speech, and especially the closing message about choosing the right people makes a real big difference in how you head at the end. And I'm not sure if you read this, but I kind of sense it might have been more or less in one place than a lot of it, maybe just a little more than left back, or just a little more, but I'm not totally sure if I'm right on that.
Your speech, honestly, it was really well prepared, as usual. I've only seen two, but of course both of them were. Great eye contact, and as Rocky noted, awesome stage presence, very engaging, great voice fluctuation as well. I think there was a point that I have a little pulled, so it could be just me, that I kind of got a little bit lost in the story, but once again, scientists, so it could be me. And I thought maybe this close could have been just a little bit stronger.
Christina, you know I love a good story, and I especially love a good story that I haven't heard before, which this is certainly one of. You are always very, very good with your descriptions. I love the way you described the beautiful day with the flowers, and then you described the three brothers, and the one brother had long ears like Buddha, and then the middle brother had a red face and a long beard, and I thought, I wonder what color his beard is. And then the third brother, you said he had pickery whiskers, and I didn't understand that. And I don't know if that's just, if that's a word that you didn't pronounce properly, or if it's a word I just don't understand. But the way you were describing them, you were so clear. I thought, is there a picture that she's seen that she knows this is what they look like? If that is the case, I would say bring them in. I also have another suggestion, which is something that Tim brought up, which is you could say the first brother looked very much like Zhuge. He had a long face, but he had very long ears like Buddha. And then the second brother looked like Tim, although he had a rougher face and a very long light beard. And so then as each brother speaks, you look at that brother and we'll imagine this brother looks like Zhuge or this brother looks like Tim. So that's a way of drawing in the audience that I think would have been very helpful. One of the things that I really would like to have heard about this is So then they're going 3 times to see this guy, they can't meet him, and then he finally says, okay, well the story is the oldest brother should be made king. And we don't really know why he says this. And I assume the fact that there's 3 brothers, there's some reason that all 3 of them are going along on this trip. And also, I would imagine that persistence and patience shows that that's the reason why the oldest one should be made that, but he didn't really say that. So I would have liked a little more of a payoff in this.
Say, Christina, as a fellow Asian like you, I am so very proud of you that you can enunciate and articulate words without everybody going like, huh? But there are still windows of opportunities, so for everybody, we need feedback. If there are some words that we mispronounce, we would like to hear it.
I thought that was a really kind of fascinating story, and I was engaged from the beginning to the end. I thought the beginning was especially lovely, and the way you started it, there was something very descriptive about the weather or the scenery or the season, and it really drew me in very quickly. I thought it was also very evocative of a time and place. I was transported to China in a distant century, and that was kind of fun, and I felt like I traveled along with you. Yeah, I think this sort of touches on what you said about the story. I would have liked to hear more about the personalities, about sort of the why this person was destined to be a king. So I think that could have been fleshed out a little more.
Already, and stories need to be seen, known, and heard, and certainly the story is very seen, very visual. Know the background. It's very effective. You're pretty much open at the beginning. Close down a little bit, I'll get to that, and then talk about growth opportunities. You're very distinct when you talk, and you've got good narration of your story. The rest of this thing is about how to take the story from where it is into where it could be. Just a few tweaks. First of all, I think it'd help to say, picture this right at the very beginning. Pulls the audience in, involves them directly, and they know what to do. Step out of the story. Have you ever had that experience? Picture that, imagine that if you were there. Scene, names. What are the names? Right from the beginning, give us the names. We associate the names with the picture. Details. When you say really the wind chill was really cold, how cold was it? 30 below, 20 below. Heard, dialogue. Dialogue sooner. Dialogue builds conflict. And that's what's missing from the story, conflict. There was really no conflict. You show up, it was delayed, but there's really no conflict. Small pivots as you're moving back and forth between the characters. You could use what I talked about earlier. Just go to Shannon and talk to her and said to this small child, and then you can crouch down a little bit like you're talking to a child and talk directly to Shannon. And then do the same thing with Cleo and involve other people as the characters of your story. And as mentioned, although you started open, you kind of closed down.
I just liked your opening. That was the first thing that I wrote down was your opening was engaging. I loved your delivery. It was such a great story. You did it without notes, just told the entire story. Overall, pronounced things really nicely. I wrote down the wind chill was terrible. I thought that was something in the way you said it that it just, it hit me very well. I did note that some words were difficult to understand, though. That's very understandable. One time you said brother, that was a word where I understood, but I had to think about it, and that's okay. I've seen some speakers do before a presentation is they'll do their speech, record it just for the voice, and they'll play it to someone else where that language is their first language, and they'll listen and then say, this word might be a little tricky, that word might be a little tricky, but that's a way to practice. And then with the video, I guess you can do the same thing. I liked your gestures when you use gestures and your body, like stepping forward. I did say there were opportunities for adding gestures if you want to add more gestures in the future. For example, with the example of the windshield being terrible, you can talk about maybe grab your arms to express or say terrible and play with your face and voice while expressing that.
You obviously were comfortable with the topic, and I think you chose a very good story. It's action-packed, and your presence really feeds into that. Because the audience is non-Chinese, I would suggest doing some adaptations of your story I'm probably the only one here that when you say old China, then I have an image of a lot of muddy roads and people dressing uncomfortable clothing and on horses. If you would like to create that image for a non-Chinese audience, perhaps just bring a picture. That would the picture's worth 1,000 words. Another thing I would like to suggest is that you stated the moral of the story, which is finding the right person for the job at the end. I would suggest for a non-Chinese audience, state your moral maybe in the beginning, so people know what you're getting at. And I agree with Shannon that perhaps the moral should be persistence. So that may be something to think about. And also, persistence will align with American values as well. In some great presence, my suggestion for opportunity for growth would be trying to adapt more with your audience.
One thing I want to mention that really captivated me is when you stood almost still with your hands to your side, but yet your expressions still flowed the story. And I don't see too many people be effective with that. I thought you were extremely effective with that, and I wanted to comment on it. I'd like the series of questions on the third visit that the brothers were asking. Growth opportunities, a lot has already been mentioned. When you describe a scene, you do so well describing people. Describing a scene, maybe if to slow down your speaking rate a little and bring a little more hand gestures. The freezing cold that you mentioned, or the snow falling heavily will get the story even more of a dynamic. But very nice, interesting history. Really enjoyed it.
I enjoyed the story very much. I enjoyed your style of oratory and your use of inflection to keep the story interesting, because there wasn't, in the beginning I noticed there wasn't a whole lot of physical movement, but the way you articulated your words, changing the pitch and the volume and changing the characters, that kept me interested in the story. Very engaging, and you have a very nice smile. That was nice to see. The only other thing I wondered about was the fact that, and this is personal, that there wasn't a lot of gesturing and movement. I mean, but in the beginning, you were talking about the beard and there was that, but later on there wasn't as much. But as I said, the style and the oratory was beautiful.
One is that you did use a story from Chinese history, and I thought it's something unfamiliar to all of us, and then I said, no, most of us in the room. And my husband is Korean, so I think the more we can learn in America, the more Westerners can learn about Asian history, the better. Your smile is beautiful, and I like the way you used it. So sometimes, when the little child says, oh, he's here today, and your face just lit up. That was really, really nice. And then another thing that's a strength, but I want to look at the counter side of that for an area of opportunity, was your use of dialogue. So that draws us into the story. And then at the same time, I think you could have made your dialogue more dynamic to get us more involved. So, and Tim touched on that a bit already. Sometimes I was confused about who was doing the talking even. So make that clear and even more emotional. The dialogue would be a way to really draw us in even more.
The three main components of any speech, which is introduction, body, and conclusion, you have met those very well. Your introduction was very appropriate. It was really an interesting, very appropriate smile. So you captured the audience by a very pleasant smile. Your pace, which is the body of the speech, was very appropriate. I felt that at certain times you slowed down appropriately because the terminology was difficult. You wanted the audience just to take a break from that too many characters, so the body was very well explained. And the ending, we were really waiting for the ending. What is the moral of the story? So tell us what you want, and you did. You said choose the right people. That was very appropriate conclusion to the story. But the 3-4 areas for growth. I have heard this recently, and you might find it effective that when you're telling a story, it might be appropriate to say from the beginning, to say, let me tell you a story, or I have a story to share with you. The the audience hear the word story, you will capture it in addition to your smile. So think about that. The names of the three brothers were very difficult to understand, and I couldn't even write them. So maybe one suggestion, if you think it's appropriate to your story, is just to say, let's call the first one John Bob, and then the second one is Tim, and the third one is another area for suggestion, I should say. You said when Liang, I don't know if I'm saying his name correctly, when he woke up, he was singing. You use the word singing. So why not just sing to the audience that song, whatever he was saying, in Chinese first? That's okay. Forgive me for doing that, and then you could translate it. I think you would capture us more than the way you have done it already. And then the last thing is you ended very well, as I mentioned, by saying choose the right people. I would just add one more purpose of the speech or the story is to say, what about be patient? Because those three brothers were extremely patient, going back and forth, call. One of them wants to go back. Then they were going to yelling at the child. And then the first time they found that, no, this is not the right, Liang's young. Forgive me for butchering his name. But then they were very, very patient. So there is a reward for patience and perseverance. In addition to that interesting conclusion, which is choose the right